Hello, everyone. This is Ray Mota from ACG, and welcome virtually. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying the rest of the conference. Joining me today is Dr. Peter Fetterolf, who's CTO from ACG Research. Peter, thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks a lot, Ray.
Yeah, one of the things that we were requested was, Peter, is the discussion regarding 5G and Edge, right? And I'd like for you to present on the topic is that if you look at the market today, there's a lot of activity in a lot of areas related to 5G, where the revenues are, a lot of the deployment challenges, and then the discussion on Edge. And what we notice is that a lot of service providers that are deploying 5G, they aren't really getting a premium off their consumer base, right? So they're either focusing on areas like, well, how do I optimize costs, right? Open RAN, vRAN, and things like this. But in talking to some of those board meetings, they're like, Ray, enough about cost savings also, right? We actually want to know about some new revenue opportunities. And some of the areas is something that ACG and yourself are really touching on is when you identify the edge, right? What are going to be those layers that potentially a service provider could fit in? Do you mind touching base on that a little bit?
Okay, Ray. Yeah, so I'd like to present some stuff because we've been doing a lot of work in this area, and like you said, one of the key questions for service providers is, not just how do I save money, but how am I going to generate new revenue streams, right? So I think a really interesting area is what's called Industry 4.0. So, if we look at the evolution, right, Industry 1.0 was basically horses and people, doing manual labor. And the transition to Industry 2.0 was moving to steam engines and other types of early manufacturing, right? And at that time, people were asking questions like, why should I invest in this stuff? It's so complicated. It's so expensive. I think maybe it's just safer to stay with what I'm doing now. Well, we all know, right, what happened to the guys with horses and the buggy whip companies. They didn't do so well, right? So now, where we are right now, we're really at Industry 3.0, which is really basically data centers and computers. And we're looking at this transition to Industry 4.0. And Industry 4.0 is really where we're looking at really a lot of robots and drones and kind of AR, VR technology. So guys can put on their glasses and look inside devices and see the wiring diagrams and all these things. And I think we're in kind of a similar situation where people are looking at it and going, my God, it's so complicated and it's so expensive. I mean, does it really make sense to make this investment? And I think what we're going to see is it is about survival, right? So it's not a question of if, it's a question of, you really have to do it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to survive. Now, the issue here is for a lot of these manufacturers and energy and healthcare, or whoever it is who's moving to this, is that there's a lot of networking and there's a lot of complexity in here. So we believe this is a big opportunity for service providers. Okay. So, as we've been working on this, right, we've realized, wow, this is pretty complicated. There's a lot of pieces here, and there's a lot of pieces from a technical point, but there's also a lot of pieces from a business point of view. Okay. So what we've done is we've organized this thing into layers, and it's not just technical layers. These are really layers of what I call the business architecture and the business stack. So at the bottom layer, we have like what we call our telco cloud layer. And this is just the basic stuff of all the network and the compute and the Kubernetes and the orchestration and all the things that allow virtualization to happen. So that's kind of a base that you need. And that could be monetized, but generally the monetization is going to occur more in the higher layers. So now above that, now we've got our kind of public-private 5G layer. And by the way, that could be 4G. It could also be Wi-Fi. But why do I say private 5G? Okay, the thing about 5G is it's been designed to solve a lot of the problems we're talking about up here in the applications layer. So things like AR, VR, where you have massive amounts of data, IoT, where you have latency requirements. So we have services like EMBB, which is basically very high speed, very lot of data. Then ultra low latency and ultra high reliability, which is these URLCC. So things where, like if you have a robot like moving around, right? You don't want that thing to run over, or a device. You don't want to run somebody over. You don't want a drone to like smash into something, right? You need to have low latency, high reliability. And then the MMTC is massive amounts of devices. So 5G has actually been designed for this. And that's why there's a lot of interest in this private 5G layer. And it's really the perfect thing to offer these services. So service provider could just stop at these first two layers, Ray, and they could just monetize these layers, and they could let somebody else do the ones above it. But then also you can move up the stack, right? You can say, okay, now this next layer is one where a lot of these applications, they require things like AI and ML, right? Machine learning, right? They require big data and all kinds of databases and things like Elasticsearch or, big SQL databases, etc. Right? There's analytics, there's visualization, there's other things like, message buses and queuing and all these kinds of things that allow a lot of these things on the top to operate. So this is another place the service providers can move up kind of to the next layer, and these things can be monetized as well. And then at the very top layer, that's where we have the applications. So that's where we have, and that's going to vary depending on the industry, right? So is it an oil refinery? Is it a big Tesla manufacturing plant? Is it a healthcare with huge numbers of IoT devices? And one model for this is like an app store model where you can kind of pick and choose what you want. Another way of looking at it is also like if you look at the AWS or Azure marketplace, where you have all these different types of services that can be offered. So we can monetize basically at all these layers. So now if you look at it from the service provider's perspective, right, from executive point of view, it's like, hey, we've invested huge amounts of money in 5G. We're going to be investing a lot more money in 5G. We need services, right? And like you said in the beginning, we can't just rely on consumer services, right? We need these new kind of industrial, industry 4.0 kind of services. So you go to the product manager and say, hey, give me services. So the product manager is like, okay, but how do I define and price these services? So like if you're at a vendor, right, and you want to price a router, you want to price a firewall, you just go to engineering and go, give me a COGS, give me all the cost of all the goods, right? And then you can exactly what it costs and you can price it, right? But for this stuff, it's a lot more complicated. So one of the things I'm going to talk about today is one of the things we're doing at ACG is we've made a big investment in a software platform. And this software platform is really designed to do a very detailed modeling and simulation of not only services, but of all the elements in the network, including software and hardware and labor and everything else, so that the product manager can define the services, they can simulate the economics, but then they can also understand the cost basis, right, for those. So like I said, if you're building a router, give me the COGS, and then I can price it. Now here it's way more complicated because it's not like a bunch of components, right? There's all these different moving pieces. So you got to understand the cost basis for that. So in designing this BAE platform, in basically we spent years and years building these various kinds of TCO and ROI models. They're always silos and they're built in Excel, and you're doing kind of repeated work. Here, what we have is an overall platform where we can have libraries of services, libraries of various kinds of resources, a common and sophisticated economic simulation platform, and then various use cases on top. And basically the way it works is we have this underlying platform. When we start out, we use an Excel as an input where we can have a lot of flexibility. We can create all kinds of different models, all kinds of different service models, and then we can simulate that. And then we have a way to very easily move from Excel to a nice user interface that's custom tailored, right, to a particular service provider, because every service provider is going to have their own unique situation. And then on top of that, we have real-time API. So then the next thing is to move to getting a real view of the network so that you can base your planning, on the real network. So just to give you an idea, Ray, of what it looks like. So the dashboard, right, we have a high level KPI, right, where we can look at, some of the key things like TCO, CapEx, OpEx, revenue, cash flow, payback, NPV, all those kinds of things, right? And we can look at it over a year by year or total across the model. And then we have a nice kind of cash flow dashboard where you can see, okay, here's my revenues, here's my cumulative cash flow, my CapEx and OpEx, and then I can break that out. So in this model here, we're looking at some high level services like video surveillance and AR, VR, and stuff like that. But then underlying that, we have a lot of different components. And in fact, if we want to look at all the components, we can see that there are all these different pieces. And these are some of the things I looked at in our chart, like AI, ML. And then we can do things like look at margin or look at revenue, and other sorts of ways. Like, for example, if you want to look at services in a bubble chart to give you an idea of where these services fall, where do they fall from a revenue point of view, from a data rate point of view. And then if we want to do more of a deep dive into our finances, we can look in the expenses, and we have like a hierarchical view. So we can say, look at the edge. And now let's say I'll double click into the edge. And I can say, oh, I've got my application services, my apps, my cloud. Well, let me look at my application services. And I can say, okay, here's my AI, ML, my analytics, my data visualization, etc. And we can look at either TCO or CapEx or OpEx and that. And then we also have a view of the flow of money via a Sankey chart, where you can say, okay, here's my central database, here's my edge, and then this is the flow of money, going from the edge to the cloud to hardware or to software, etc. And then where the software breaks out. So it kind of gives you a visual view of that. And again, you can either look at CapEx or OpEx, and as well, you can look at the flow of data here. So we can look at data rates going from sort of, the model is built with endpoints to services to data center resources to data centers. So this gives you an idea, okay, what are the actual data rates and the flow of data that is actually creating these services. And then there's a lot of other things as well. I don't want to get into everything, but we can then get the full cash flow statement. You can see this is organized in the same kind of hierarchy that we had there. And the hierarchy, by the way, is totally configurable. So we can customize that for any particular service provider. So this is kind of very detailed cash flow, and then we can export this and a lot of other things to Excel. So just to close out, I just want to reiterate that this industry 4.0, this is a big opportunity, Ray. And if service providers really want to really make this 5G investment pay off, okay, it's about edge services, but it's also about, hey, who are the customers and where's the kind of low hanging fruit? And like I said, if you look at this diagram here, are you going to be like one of the guys that got stuck on the horse? If you're one of the guys that got stuck on the horse, you're going away.
Right.
You're not going to be around anymore. So, and the service providers, they got a big role to play here. They got a big role to play because I've got this private 5G layer, which is totally well suited. I mean, if I'm using Wi-Fi here, yeah, we can do that. But then the vehicle runs somebody over and kills them. And right. What happens then, right? So I believe it's a big opportunity. And we've been doing a lot of work with a bunch of customers with our software BAE platform to help figure out how to price these services, how profitable they're going to be, how to monetize them, and then what's the plan moving forward. So anyway, I hope that was a helpful.
Yeah, no, honestly, that was really helpful, and it's good that you show the BAE platform. But I think one of the things that stands out maybe from a summary point of view is that you've taken an area that's very complex to understand the insertion points for telco and where the added value, as well as where the vendors play in there. And you've created this architecture layer that allows you to map, right, the different insertion points and then what the potential revenue chains of that. It looks simple, but there's a lot of complexity to get to the point. So I think that was great. But the other part as well is that from a telco is that they do need to take this vertical approach, right, in order to add value and be able to identify these revenue opportunities, so they could identify a service profitability model on where they're inserting in the verticals and identify the best way they could get their NPV for that, which is great. So Peter, thanks for joining, and the audience, if you've got any questions, you can submit it and we'll follow up with that. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Thank you, Ray. We'll see you.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.